Alright, welcome to the first video in our DSLR series. In this video, we're going to be covering the basics. We're going to get you through some of the general terminology, words that are thrown around a lot when referring to these awesome cameras, so that you have a better idea, better understanding. You can just wrap your mind around this really cool piece of kit that you have in front of you. Alright, so before we really jump into the nitty-gritty, like I said before, this is a series. Videos will be coming out weekly or a couple times a week, so be sure you subscribe so that you get notified whenever we drop a new one so that you can learn along with us here. So first thing we're going to cover is the name, DSLR. What the heck does that even stand for? It's thrown around all the time, and you know it as cameras that have fancy lenses that you can change out, but what does it really mean? Well, let's go through it one word at a time. Digital single lens reflex. Well, the digital part's easy. It's a digital camera. So before digital cameras came out, it was just called an SLR, single lens reflex. That's really just a fancy way of saying that whenever you look through this viewfinder here, you're seeing straight out of the lens. And the way that works is through a series of mirrors. Think about a periscope on a submarine. You look through one part, a mirror bounces it up and out so that you can see above the water. The same principle for these. There's actually a mirror behind the lens as well as a mirror right on the other side of the viewfinder. So when you look through that, you're seeing directly out of the lens. That's why you'll hear a lot of people refer to other cameras as mirrorless cameras. So going back to the mirrors, when you take a picture with an SLR, you hear that noise? That noise is actually just the mirror behind the lens flipping up and allowing light to go through the lens all the way to the back of the camera where there's a sensor. Now before digital cameras, the sensor would have been replaced with film, which is a light sensitive piece of film. And that would actually record the image. So we'll get into this a little more in later videos, but I'm gonna adjust the shutter speed of this camera, take it all the way down to 2.5 seconds. Now listen. You hear that? That means that the mirror was flipped up for 2.5 seconds, allowing light to come in the camera and bathe that sensor for 2.5 seconds. Now, the only time you'd really need to use that kind of shutter speed is if it's really, really dark outside, you're trying to do some kind of painting with light, long exposure stuff, which are also all things we're going to be getting into in later videos. But today we're just going to cover the basics. So what makes this camera, or this camera, better than this camera? Well, a lot, actually. So the most obvious difference, and the biggest difference, is that you can swap lenses. There's that mirror I was talking about. Flips up, there's the sensor, flips back down, shows you the mirror again. Therefore, when you're looking through the viewfinder and you take the picture, you're not going to be able to see anything because the mirror is gone. When it comes to swapping lenses, this is where you're going to want to pick a brand. I particularly have been shooting with Canon for about 15 years now, and I really like their cameras. It's all about a preference. I would say you can't go wrong with Canon or Nikon, and you're going to find most of the lenses out there will fit Canons or Nikons. The reason you need to stick to a brand at this point is because lenses are proprietary. And what that means is this Canon lens is not going to fit on a Nikon camera or a Sony camera or a Fuji camera. It's only going to fit on a Canon camera. There are also different brands like Sigma, Tiffin, these kind of off-brand lenses that are made specifically for Canons, Nikons, Fujis, Sonys, and so on. I know Sony did come out with a camera that allows you to put Canon lenses on their camera, which is pretty cool, but at that point, I think you're still better off probably just getting a Canon. Like I said before though, it's all about preference. The only reason I switched to Canon, I used to shoot Nikon, was because I went to school for photography and everyone was using Canons and I just got used to the interface. You would be really, really hard pressed to be able to tell the difference between an image taken on a high-end Canon DSLR and a high-end Nikon DSLR. They're both really the top of the line, so you can't go wrong with either. Now the advantage to switching lenses is massive. To be honest with you, the camera body itself is just the very, very beginning of what makes DSLRs so cool. Once you get into it, you'll realize that you're going to spend way more on your lenses than you ever spent on the body of the camera. And that's a good thing, because lenses are super cool. We're going to get into all the things that make lenses super cool in an upcoming video. We've gone over the viewfinder. We've also gone over the mirror, and the sensor, or the film. So now let's talk about the shutter. What the shutter does, let me show you real quick. What the shutter does is opens and closes to allow light into the sensor. The amount that you allow the shutter to open or close is referred to as the aperture, or the f-stop, you might have heard people refer to it as. Every single camera, every single lens maxes out at 22. That's the top aperture. That means super closed. You can't get any more closed than f22. Now it's f-stop 22. That's your aperture rating. So the aperture controls how open or closed the shutter is. Every DSLR has a little hidden button on it. This one happens to be right here that allows you to see the shutter when it's open or closed. Now, this is all the way closed, so this is at 22. If I was to open it all the way up, this lens actually happens to go to 1.8, which is one of the most wide open apertures you could get. You won't see it do anything. Nothing's happening because you're allowing all the light to come flooding in that camera. Now, this is one of the big things that separates amazing lenses from mediocre lenses. How wide open the aperture can go. We'll get into all the cool things that the aperture allows you to control in the next video. But for now, let's just get back to the basics. We have the mirror, the sensor, we have the aperture, which controls how open and closed the shutter goes, and there's one more big one called the shutter speed. Now that determines how long the shutter is open or closed. This camera, this is a Canon 70D, the shutter can go all the way up to 1/8,000th of a second. That means that the shutter is opening and closing, allowing that light in to hit the sensor for 1/8,000th of a second. Let's hear what that sounds like. That's fast. That's really fast. And you can go all the way down to 30 seconds. You can actually go to a setting called bulb, which is where it'll stay open for as long as you're holding the shutter button down, which is an indefinite amount of time. You would want to use that if you're out trying to do some pictures at nighttime, if you're trying to do some cool nighttime landscapes or star pictures, something along those lines, you're going to want to do the bulb setting. So just to give you another example, we'll set it for 2 seconds. There you go. That's an example of the shutter speed. And we're also going to get into some really cool things you can do with shutter speed in the next video as well. Before I go any further, actually, I want you guys to understand that the things I'm teaching you right now are not only applicable for taking pictures, but these are things you're going to need to know for shooting video as well. This is your shutter release button. This button opens and closes the shutter, allowing light to flood in and hit the sensor so that it captures your image. All of your modern DSLRs are going to have a half button autofocus, which means you can kind of feel if you push it halfway, it goes down, but it doesn't click all the way down. Now that's how you're going to want to autofocus. Look through your viewfinder, click it down, you'll hear it focus. Once you get into focus, click it the rest of the way. And that's how you take your picture. Another really cool feature that you're going to find on DSLRs or SLRs in general are something called a hot shoe, which is this thing right on top here. Now that you can put a flash on. This is our microphone that we use for video recording. I have a flash on the hot shoe of this camera. You can put all sorts of cool accessories, and we're going to go over accessories in a later video as well. But the hot shoe is basically your accessory holder. So we'll just put this microphone back in the hot shoe, tighten it down. And generally, when you put something in the hot shoe, the camera can automatically detect what it is. So don't worry about buying a peripheral that might not be made by Canon or Nikon or whatever your camera is. They're pretty smart. So as soon as you put them on there, they can usually determine what it is and use it automatically. So aside from the hot shoe on the top of the camera, this is your mode selector. Now this is going to be something that you're going to find on all DSLRs as well as mirrorless cameras nowadays have mode selectors so that you can control all these little fancy settings. Right now I have it on manual, and I highly recommend you shoot on manual too. Okay, on your lens itself, that's where you're going to find your autofocus and manual focus toggle switch. Now, every lens has a little switch on it for manual focus or autofocus, and that just allows you to take over the focus. It's kind of self-explanatory. They're always going to be in a slightly different spot, but you'll find them generally closer to the base of the camera, autofocus or manual focus. So some of the controls for the actual camera you're going to find on the lens itself. Also, one thing you got to remember is that the lens is what determines the aperture, not the camera. All cameras can go wide open or closed. It depends on the lens and how wide open the lens is capable of opening that shutter. So with regular SLRs, non-digital, it records your image on a film, obviously. On DSLRs, it's going to record your image onto a card, and it'll usually be a compact flash or a SanDisk card. A lot of modern DSLRs will also have a lock, and you might be wondering what this lock could possibly be for. On this 70D, the lock is right here, and on my 5D, the lock is a little different. It actually, if you turn the switch up all the way, it's unlocked, and if you just turn it to on, it's locked. And what that lock is your aperture lock. Why would you need an aperture lock? Well, a lot of photographers, once you get to the upper echelon of photography and you start taking really, really good, more professional images, you'll realize that the aperture is actually the most important setting on the entire camera. You can get those really cool depth of field shots. You can have that nice focal fall off in the background. And you also allow more light to come in, so it allows for more flexibility in your image control. So sometimes locking your aperture is a really good idea if you don't want to accidentally change it while you're in the middle of a shoot, and then get back to your post-production and realize that you completely changed your images. Sometimes it's a great idea to use, but what I usually do is set my camera in AV, which is aperture priority mode. We'll get a little more into the modes in a later video. Now we're just talking about the body and the general basics of a DSLR. So aside from being able to swap lenses and do really cool stuff with your image control, what else makes a DSLR great? Well, generally speaking, the sensors on DSLRs are going to be larger than the sensors on mirrorless cameras. And that allows for more information to be recorded. So better colors, more vivid colors, a deeper feel to the image, more contrast, more real, genuine, real-to-life colors. So right out of the box, DSLRs are going to generally give you a richer, cleaner, more true-to-life image than your mirrorless cameras. This one, for example, the Canon 5D, has a full-size sensor, which means the sensor is the same size as film was in a regular camera. And actually, I forgot the number there. I'll have to look it up and put it on the screen. But that's how big it is. And that means that this camera is going to record everything in amazing, vivid, deep, rich color tones. And that's really important when you start getting into professional photography and professional videography. You want your colors to be true to life. You want them to be rich and vivid. You don't want a computer to try to process your image and say, this is what I think it should look like. One of the biggest things when it comes to any camera, mirrorless or DSLR, is the white balance. Never trust that white balance to do it for you. Always go in before you start a shoot and adjust the white balance appropriately so your colors come out looking true to life. You don't want something to come off blue or orange or yellow, and if it does, it's more than likely because of your white balance. So there are three main components when you are adjusting your DSLR that you want to focus on: shutter speed, aperture, and the last one we haven't talked about yet, your ISO. Now the ISO used to be called film speed. If you remember back in the day when you bought film, it would have a number on it, 100, 400, 2000. And the faster motion you were trying to capture, or the lower light you were going to be using, the higher you'd want that number to be. But you also may have noticed that the higher the number was, the more grainy and the more flat the image generally tends to look. So as a rule of thumb, I always adjust the ISO last. On digital cameras, it means the sensitivity of the sensor itself. So you have three components: how wide open the shutter is, that's your aperture; how quickly it opens, that's your shutter speed; and the ISO, which is the sensitivity of the sensor that the light is going to be hitting. So with those three things in mind, there's always a compromise. You always have to think about your image, think about your video before you adjust those things. One more thing I want to talk about with you guys is if you're looking through the viewfinder and you have autofocus on and it doesn't seem to be focusing quite right, there's a good chance that you need to adjust your actual viewfinder. So every viewfinder is set to a certain prescription, kind of like glasses are. So if you have different eyesight than somebody else, then you're going to see something different through this viewfinder. And there's a little dial at the very top of the camera, or at the very top of the viewfinder, that allows you to make fine-tune adjustments to the optics of the viewfinder. And that's very, very, very important. You know, when I first started shooting, I thought my camera was broken. I didn't understand why all my pictures were coming out blurry when I was trying to shoot manual, or why autofocus was not working properly. And it was only because I didn't have my viewfinder adjusted, which is kind of silly. So that is the basics of DSLR cameras. The next video, we're going to be going over aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, how to take your camera out of auto mode into manual mode and use those three really cool features to take amazing images. I hope you guys got something from this. Please be sure to comment down below and let me know if there's anything in particular that you want to learn about. I'll be glad to do a video about it on here for you. Also, like usual, all the equipment that we use here at Zeal Productions is going to be listed down below in the description box if you want to check it out for yourself. So thanks for checking out this introduction to DSLRs. We look forward to seeing you for the next video.